Welcome back. Joining me now is senior correspondent at the Australian Financial Review, Aaron Patrick, and political reporter at The Australian, Richard Ferguson. Ferguson, thank you so much for joining me, both of you.
Good evening, Sharri.
Thank you.
I want to go to the big news this weekend that Amy Coney Barrett, as expected, has been appointed to the Supreme Court by Trump. 48-year-old conservative from Indiana with 7 children. Aaron, why did Trump decide on her so quickly?
Because, Sharri, this is the big deal. This is Donald Trump making history, and he has a window here, a really narrow window, to get Amy Barrett on the Supreme Court before the election. The election's November the 3rd. The Republicans control the Senate. They've got 53 votes. They may not control it after the election, so he can just sneak her through and potentially change the course of US history for decades. So this is just one of these pivotal moments where everything is opened up right for Donald Trump, and he's seen an opportunity and he is going for it.
Richard, what's been the reaction?
Well, as you can imagine, the Democrats are appalled, A, because it's so close to the election, but B, you might remember that in the last election, Anton Scalia, the Conservative justice, died, just like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And this was many months before the election, and Mitch McConnell, the Republican Senate leader, stopped Barack Obama from filling that seat, saying that you couldn't do so in an election year. Fast forward for 4 years, Mitch McConnell says, well, it's fine because I like this nominee and I'm the same party as the president, so I'm going to fill the spot, which is probably what everyone expected. Now, I think that Donald Trump has made a political error choosing Amy Coney Barrett, not because of what she thinks or what her legal philosophy is, but because he should have gone with the other conservative candidate for this spot, Barbara Lagoa. Now, Barbara Lagoa was a Cuban American judge from Florida. We all know that Florida is such a pivotal swing state. Now, Biden is still in the lead, but things have tightened there. And one of the big reasons things have tightened there is because Trump has a lot of support with Cuban Americans, who are obviously very anti-socialist because so many of them and so many of their grandparents escaped the Castro communist regime in Cuba. So I think if he chose Lagoa instead of Barrett, he would have had a very good chance to make huge inroads with Cuban Americans and possibly win Florida and save himself from what's looking like a very tired election. I think that Amy Coney Barrett is too politically viable. Well, sort of, she's much easier to attack. She's much easier to attack for the Democrats than Barbara Lagoa, who is a bit more moderate and would have just blown things for, I think went down very well in Florida. So I think it's an odd pick.
Yeah. What's interesting that some Democratic politicians are even refusing to meet with her during the hearing process that's coming up, which is quite ridiculous, you think. I want to move on to the US presidential debate. It's the first of 3 debates. It's happening on Wednesday, our time. Aaron, what are the main topics that are going to dominate this first debate?
It's going to be on Fox News, and Chris Wallace is doing it. They're going to look at COVID, the economy, possible transition, and the records of Biden and Trump. So this is really going to canvass the big issues facing America at the moment. And what we expect is Donald Trump to be Donald Trump, which is to ridicule, mock, possibly lie about Joe Biden. And Joe Biden is going to have to prove that he can step up because I think because he's been portrayed as a man who's too old for the job, and he's got to prove that he can speak on his feet. So very, very important. I think there's more at stake here for Biden than for Trump.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. Richard, you know, Trump has the whole time painted Joe Biden as senile. There's speculation he might have, you know, something like dementia or some other illness wrong with him. And there's been plenty of evidence in media interviews that would go to seemingly support that. But now there's been a change in tone just before the debate where now the Trump camp is saying, oh, actually, he is a very professional, very good debater. So they've, you know, been trying to change the expectations there. But, you know, I think Aaron's right that this is a debate where Biden has a lot to lose. He's ahead of the polls currently, you know, for whatever that's worth, the polls. And Trump has done really well in debates in the past. He's always very well prepared with sharp lines. And Biden is naturally not a good public speaker.
The one thing I'd say about Joe Biden and being senile, that if you've ever seen Joe Biden, if you look at his past 40 years in public senile, think about who's going senile here. His past 40 years in public service, you'd think that he was senile from about the age of 22. I mean, the man just can't speak English properly. He just can't do it. But I think that it's just what you mentioned, the fact that they've now changed their messaging. They made a huge tactical mistake in lowering the bar for Joe Biden so low that when Joe Biden, if he gets up there and manages to speak in short sentences for an hour, most people will think that he was some sort of genius. I mean, the bar is so low for Joe Biden, just like it was with his convention speech, which we talked about a month ago. The bar was set so low for Joe Biden that when he gave a rather good speech, he came across as some sort of political genius in that moment. And that's the problem that people make with Joe Biden. I do think that he is underestimated a lot. I think it helped him in the primaries. He was beaten in every debate in the primaries by people like Elizabeth Warren, like Kamala Harris is now running mate, by Bernie Sanders. And he ended up wiping the floor with all of them and winning the nomination in a huge landslide. So, I mean, you've got to wonder. Also, you have to say Hillary Clinton seemingly won every debate according to the pundits. So if I was Joe Biden and Donald Trump, I wouldn't be listening to anything says after the debates, because sometimes it's the absolute opposite of what people think that people take out from the debates.
Aaron, obviously, as you said a minute ago, the COVID-19 pandemic and pandemic management, how the president has handled it, is set to be a big issue in the debates. How do you think Trump can possibly defend his actions during the pandemic?
Well, he will defend them. Whether he'll convince anyone that he did the right thing is going to be another matter, because so much has come out which is contradictory in terms of what Trump's said behind the scenes and what he's actually done. So he actually admitted in this for a book that he downplayed it, and he thought it was really serious, but he didn't want to get people too scared. So, look, Donald Trump, in a way, it sort of doesn't matter what he says or it's the truth, because people either love him or hate him so much that they'll either believe him or not believe him, depending on their feelings about him. So part of this thing is really about firing up the base, because obviously Americans don't have compulsory voting like us. And, and taking a step back to, this is why he's running at Amy Barrett to fire up Conservatives, to go out and vote. So I think no matter the reality of the situation, which is clearly that COVID-19 has been a massive disaster in the US, completely unlike the situation here, notwithstanding Victoria, I think he will go out there and make his case, and many people will believe him.
Yeah. Look, I want to move on to another topic. In China, hundreds of thousands of people reportedly have been given a COVID-19 vaccine even before the vaccine has gone through the regulatory approval processes. This is, pretty amazing when you think about it, that the virus began in Wuhan, China, and now China is the first place where a vaccine is rolled out. But Richard, do you think this is unethical? That people are being given this vaccine before anyone knows whether it's safe or what the side effects could be?
Well, I think one of the other big questions, Sharri, with that is how much can you believe anything the Chinese government says? I mean, most of us didn't believe the numbers that they put out about how many coronavirus cases they had in the first place. How can you believe A, anything about this vaccine, and B, if so many people have actually got it? I mean, this is the problem that comes out with China. It is very, very hard to verify or believe things that are coming out of the Chinese mainland in a way that it hasn't been since normalization of relations, and since Tiananmen Square. So it's just very hard to verify. Is it unethical? Absolutely. I mean, these vaccines have to be double, triple, quadruple checked before anyone gets them, because we all know that a vaccine with bad side effects can be even worse than the virus. But number two, I mean, it's pretty unethical that hundreds of thousands of people are getting this in China and the rest of the world's just finding out about it now and doesn't have a chance to actually try it for themselves. I mean, I think Scott Morrison has made a very good point over a couple of months that any country that attempts to keep basically a coronavirus vaccine for itself, considering the damage that's been done to the entire world, will be looked on very badly by history. Absolutely.
And Aaron, at the very least, shouldn't the scientists in Australia, in the US, in the UK be able to, shouldn't they be given this vaccine to analyse, to look at, to find out, how it is that China has reached this vaccine?
Well, of course they should be. And this is just another example of how the Chinese regime works. They have no regard for basic human rights. And the fact that you would give a vaccine, which is potentially fatal, unproven vaccines are very, very dangerous, volatile kind of treatments. And big vaccine trials normally take years and years, and you have to test them on 15 to 30,000 people, stage 3. So this is just another example, and one of my colleagues from the Fin Review, Michael Smith, he just came back in the office. He basically, had to run out of China because of fear of being arrested. And this is a country which is thumbing its nose at the rest of the world and basic human rights, and we should all be very concerned about that.
Yeah. Look, on to very sad news today. Susan Ryan, Labor's first female cabinet minister, has died at 77. Richard, there's been praise for her achievements today from both sides of politics.
There definitely has. Susan Ryan was almost solely responsible for the Sex Discrimination Act and the Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action Acts, which many people today have described as the biggest reforms for women in Australia since they got the vote. And she was obviously a pioneer. She was the only Labour female cabinet minister up until her resignation, and then she was replaced by only one, and that was Ros Kelly, and then she was only one by Carmen Lawrence. The Hawke Keating years were not great for women's representation in politics, it has to be said. But she also, ever since she left the Parliament as well, having achieved those pretty totemic things in the Sex Discrimination Act and all the things that did, people could still be sacked for getting pregnant, getting married until that law came through. But after that, she did a lot of work for women's rights, and she's done a lot of work. She did a lot of work for age discrimination as age discrimination commissioner. So she's a pretty huge figure. Of course, Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese out today praising her, as were past prime ministers like Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard, and other leaders such as Bill Shorten. So she was a pretty big figure in the history of the Labour Party and the history of women's rights in Australia.
Yeah, and there might be a state funeral for her. Aaron, do you want to add anything there to her legacy and what you think has been so important from her contribution to public life?
I do, Sharri. Look, sadly, in a way, Susan Ryan was an example of what was wrong with the Labor Party, in that there were so few women and it took so long to get women in Parliament. No women, no Labor ministers, female Labor ministers under Whitlam, only Susan Ryan and Ros Kelly under Hawke Keating. That's pretty pathetic. Also, Susan Ryan, when in as Education Minister, she wasn't really successful because she opposed the use of the HECS fees that Hawke and Keating were introducing. And then she got demoted and she was made responsible for the Australia card, and that failed as well. So Susan Ryan's great, I think, contribution to politics in a way was through her position as a lobbyist for the rights of women and as a legislator able to push the Sexual Discrimination Act. As a minister, unfortunately, she wasn't particularly effective, and she's also an example of how slow the Labor Party was in promoting women, which fortunately they've rectified.
Okay, we are out of time. Aaron Patrick and Richard Ferguson, thank you so much again, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Sharri.